2 words, Ron DeSanctimonious. It's official now, pretty much. Trump at least feels that he is running for president against Ron DeSantis. Trump hasn't announced that he's running yet. I'm sure he will probably this Wednesday. I mean, he's not going to do it before the midterms, but he's already fighting his campaign. I mean, he's attacking DeSantis, who is, up for re-election in Florida. Not that there's a chance that he would lose, but it is funny that when Trump, he can't hold himself back. I mean, so many times have I seen Trump in public asked, "Hey, you going to run for president?" And he does everything but say absolutely yes. And so it's been clear since January of 2021 that Trump is coming back, and now it's clear that he sees DeSantis as his one rival. And to me, the fact that this came out of Trump's mouth before the midterms, while supposedly, he's supposed to be supporting DeSantis for governor for re-election, as an underling, Trump already is coming out and taking pot shots. So I think I have a bit of a unique perspective on this matter. From what I've seen on Twitter, people are of two minds. There is the Matt Walsh school, which I respect. I like Matt Walsh, but I think he's a jerk and an idiot sometimes. I feel like if I ever met the man, he would be very, very unfriendly, and he would probably spit in my face, although he probably wouldn't even think I was worth that. That's how Matt Walsh has always come across to me. But he does have a very substantial following. He's grown exponentially in the time that I've been aware of him. I first discovered Matt Walsh back when I think he was just writing articles for like theblaze.com. Does anybody still read the articles on The Blaze? Anyway, he seems to be the biggest defender of DeSantis in this latest row. He is the person I'm seeing quoted the most, and his perspective seems to have resonated with the pro-DeSantis crowd within conservative politics. And the perspective articulated by Mr. Walsh is generally that DeSantis is a serious person. He's not a clown. He has real accomplishments, and he cannot be dismissed with a simple nickname. So before I get into a response to that sentiment, I want to start from the beginning. Way back in, should I even start in 2018? I met Ron DeSantis at a campaign event. It wasn't even his own campaign event. It was another event that he was there in an official capacity campaigning for himself for the U.S. Senate. This was back in 2016. Marco Rubio was running for president, and therefore he would be vacating his Senate seat, not running for re-election. And DeSantis was the guy who was going to replace him. He would have been the clear winner of the primary. Was getting backing from FreedomWorks. I believe that the signs at that event, actually I think it was a FreedomWorks event if I remember correctly, but the signs and all of the merchandise there were paid for by FreedomWorks. Actually, I might have a shirt or something from that event. And I gave him a test. I remember. I asked him a question that was completely it was an intentional gotcha question. It was something that was not an issue in the campaign. It was something that was not discussed widely. It really just, I knew that he wouldn't have an answer to it. And so I wanted to see if he would be honest and just say, what are you talking about? Because what I said wasn't gibberish. I asked him some question about like a negative income tax, which is a concept that Milton Friedman used to talk about, to replace the welfare state. And nobody talked about it. It wasn't, negative income tax, not really a practical idea, because you would have to repeal all of the existing welfare state, which is so entrenched that it's just, you would end up just creating new welfare, would be the end result of a negative income tax. I don't want to litigate that here. But I brought it up with him, and DeSantis did not say, huh? He didn't go, that's really out of left field. But he also answered in a way that didn't sound like he had no idea what he was talking about. So what that told me is that DeSantis is very slick and he's very quick on his feet. That was the purpose of my question. Would he be honest and say, huh, what are you talking about? Can you elaborate a little bit? That's kind of out of left field. That would have been the honest answer. And then the other two, the other potential I would have expected was for him to try and stumble and to completely BS his way through, but not do it convincingly. But he BS'd his way through the question while still coming across as informed and intelligent, which makes him kind of dangerous. But nonetheless, I could see he was a very skilled politician, and I thought he was going places. Now, fast forward 2 years to 2018. Rubio, of course, had reclaimed his Senate seat because he was trounced by Trump in the primary, so Rubio had to go crawling back to his home state here and run for re-election for the Senate, so DeSantis dropped out. And I suppose at that point probably started plotting his run for governor. Now, in 2018, the favorite to win the Republican nomination was a man by the name of Adam Putnam. He was the Commissioner of Agriculture here. He was from right in the middle of the state, Polk County. He was from Bartow. I think that's maybe the second biggest of the legacy cities. It's like the second major city in Polk County. It's a very big county. Our last Democratic governor here in the state, Lawton Chiles, well, last elected Democrat, he died in office, and his lieutenant, I think, Buddy McKay, took over. But the last elected Democratic governor in the state of Florida was from Lakeland. He was from Polk County. And so Putnam was also from there. His family has a county named after them up in North Florida. It's a very old name, very entrenched people. He was a politician right out of college. I mean, I think at like age 21, right when he graduated from UF, got his bachelor's, he went and ran for the State House and got in there, and then he went to to Congress. He just started working his way up the ladder, waiting his turn, and eventually he got to run for a statewide office. And that was the Commissioner of Agriculture, and he just did all this, being a team player for the GOP. He was waiting in line. He was a part of the machine. And so when Rick Scott got term limited out and was going to run for Senate against Bill Nelson, Putnam was the heir apparent. He was not the lieutenant governor, but he was a statewide elected cabinet official in the Commissioner of Agriculture. The Commissioner of Agriculture is a pretty powerful position here in Florida. It's an important office. It's up there with the Attorney General and the Secretary of State. Those are your three big positions under the governor. And so when the primary started, Putnam clearly had the name ID. He had all of the establishment backing. He had the organization, a substantial organization. He pretty much had the state party apparatus behind him unofficially. And yet DeSantis won the primary. Why is that? Does anybody remember? When you folks around? Most of these people who are fans of DeSantis came around in the last couple of years, since 2020, because of the lockdown stuff. Because they liked that here in Florida, we got to live a normal life. And I like that too. Very much appreciate that he kept things mostly sane here. But in 2018, when DeSantis was running, the only reason he won his primary was because of one tweet from Donald Trump endorsing him. That's what made DeSantis a candidate here. Now, DeSantis on his own has established his reputation. Now that, once he became governor, he has real accomplishments. I agree with Matt Walsh on that. And to the extent that he's popular because he went against Trump. You could make that argument. Because Trump never really condemned the lockdowns. He said, well, the lockdowns were good when I did them, and then they were bad when the Democrats did them. That has pretty much been Trump's line. He said the vaccines were very good. I got them at warp speed, very good, saved, millions of lives. This is Trump's perspective. DeSantis, on the other hand, while he did push the access to the vaccines quite a bit, he was staunchly opposed to vaccine mandates. Trump was more wishy-washy on that. I think that deep down, Trump thinks, well, I made the vaccines are good, why wouldn't everyone get them? Why would a vaccine mandate be so bad? I think that would be Trump's true perspective, but he also has enough sense to know that that would enrage his base. Furthermore, DeSantis' Surgeon General issued a warning to men ages 28 and younger, telling them not to get the vaccine. So you have someone who rode into office entirely on Trump's coattails. DeSantis had no organization. And since coming into office, well, since 2020 really, he has successfully differentiated himself in positive ways from one Donald J. Trump. But his base of support overlaps almost entirely with Donald Trump. People who support DeSantis also support Trump. DeSantis understands this, I think, more than anybody, because if you look to the extent that he's gone to try and court the Trump audience, he has made himself orange, noticeably. He did not used to be orange. He has taken speech lessons. He's changed his intonation, his enunciation, his mannerisms. He talks with his hands much more, and really his whole body. He very clearly is putting on a Trump act. He's trying to be Trump to a certain extent, although on certain policy issues, he's better than Trump. Now, there also could be situations in the future in which he's worse than Trump. Ultimately, though, at the end of the day, I see what DeSantis has been doing, his homages to Trump's style, as an implicit recognition that he cannot stand on his own, that he cannot take Trump on directly, because he would alienate too much of Trump's base, which is also DeSantis' base. There is too much overlap for him to step up to stand against Trump. So when Matt Walsh says, oh, the nickname's not going to be enough this time, the nickname was enough with everybody else. Because Trump drug his opponents down into the mud. He humiliated them. He emasculated them. And he always gets them to degrade themselves even further. He makes fun of them. He teases them like a schoolyard bully. And then they get down in the mud themselves. And all of a sudden, they're no longer holier than thou. They lose that appeal, that cleanliness that they had. And that alienates their own voters who liked that sort of purity, if you will, about these candidates, the way in which they were cleaner and less rough around the edges than Trump. Once they get down in the mud with him, all that goes away. And then they're left really with no one, because the people who don't mind a candidate that's rough around the edges and who doesn't always do the right thing, but who they feel understands them more, they're already on Trump's side. They already sided with Trump over DeSantis. And that is what every candidate who's taken on Trump has found out in the Republican Party. Look at Rubio, look at Christie, look at Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, who else was in the 2016 primaries? All those men, well, and women, I guess. There was Carly Fiorina. Gosh. Dodged a bullet there. Anyway, None of those people could ever be taken seriously again. They're not serious people. Ted Cruz is someone who no one would ever think of as a potential president. Rand Paul, of course not. Little Marco, how could anyone think that? And I say that as someone who likes Rand Paul. I think Rand Paul still would have been a better president than Donald Trump, easily. But it's the monkey brain inside us all that won't allow this country to elect any of those men, because they're small and they're weak in the eyes of the voters. And DeSantis, if he takes on Trump, I think more likely than not runs the risk of ending up exactly like them, because it happened to everyone else. Why would DeSantis think he's special? I'm not convinced that DeSantis does think he's special. I think that's why DeSantis has copied Trump's mannerisms. He understands that Trump has something that works politically, and he wants to capitalize on that himself. But if you are imitating someone who you agree is successful, I don't think that a wise person would try and take that person on. Why would the imitation win out over the genuine article? I would very much dislike seeing DeSantis take on Trump, because I do think it would ruin him for the future. And I think at this point he is the best chance that the Republicans have of electing a decent president. I think that he would make a better president potentially than Trump, depending on foreign policy stuff. I think that there's a big question mark open about DeSantis and foreign policy. I think that he's much more likely to get co-opted by the neocons than Trump, even though Trump is much more gullible. He's much more easily led astray. He at least has good instincts. To me, there's no indication that DeSantis has any instincts or any personal beliefs. I think that he would be more than happy to essentially auction off his foreign policy in exchange for support in culture war battles, for example. Then again, DeSantis has enough sense to not speak on foreign policy. DeSantis did not come out and play the stand with Ukraine game. I think he recognizes when the establishment has a narrative going, when it is something that they're pushing. I think he has enough sense to understand that, you know what, I don't want to jump on their bandwagons. I want to see what the voters are talking about, what they're caring about, and jump on their bandwagons. And I think he's done that consistently. In fact, a lot of times he's been out ahead of the pack. I would say that with vaccine mandates. DeSantis was making moves on vaccine mandates, trying to head them off at the pass before a lot of people were talking about them, before they were implemented. And so he was proactive on vaccine mandates. And I find that interesting. I find that very interesting. It's one of the reasons that I think that he would overall make a better president than Trump. I think that he understands that appealing to the voter that Trump rediscovered in this country is a smart political move. But I think that DeSantis has a higher political IQ and could put that plan into practice more effectively than Trump. With that said, however, that's a very different question than asking if he could beat Trump in a head-on-head battle. To that question, I would say the answer is most likely no. Trump has something that DeSantis, I think, never will, and that's star power. I've never seen Trump in a room that he did not dominate. I've never seen a stronger personality than his. And as long as that's the case, I don't think that in a Republican primary you're going to beat him head-to-head. It's different than a general election. In a general election, you don't have to appeal to the same people who already are voting for Trump for the most part. You might be you might be trying to appeal in a general election to, some reluctant Trump voters who said, you know what, Trump's icky, but he's so much better on the issues. Even though I don't like his tweets, and I've met a lot of people like, oh, I don't like Trump's tweets, but those are not the dominant people. Those aren't going to swing a Republican primary. Those people, the people who say, I like Trump's policies, but he's icky, I wish he was more presidential, those people are a very small minority inside of the Republican Party. They're not as small as a minority as, neocons and rhinos. The neocons are represented by approximately 0% of the voters, or I should say the neocons represent approximately 0% of the voters. There are no, real-life neocons, out in the hinterland, working at the hardware store in a small town in Ohio. But there are real people who like Trump, like his policies, and want him to be a little bit more serious. And DeSantis, I think, clearly is trying to appeal not only to those people, though. I think that he wouldn't have changed his mannerisms and become more loose, talk with his hands, paint himself orange, if he wasn't also trying to go after the people who like the style of Trump. But he can play both sides, I think, well. He pulls off that Trump style in a more serious and I won't say more confident, just a more serious version of Trump. In a primary, though, that's not going to roll. I think that DeSantis, I think that where he's at now, I think that he would do better than what we're seeing in polls now, because there's not enough, he's not well known enough outside of Florida and outside of people who just follow politics very closely. Regular people, let's say in Iowa, just to pick a random state out of 150, I wasn't even thinking of the Iowa caucuses. I was just thinking of, somewhere in the middle of the country. But yes, obviously the Iowa caucus would be his first test. People in Iowa largely probably don't know who he is. Part of that reason is that Iowa didn't have not as good of a governor as DeSantis, but not the worst in the country. And their lockdowns there were not as severe or as long as in, let's say, Michigan. And so I think perhaps Republicans in Michigan, in a state like that, would have much more admiration for DeSantis because they would envy people living under his rule, versus those of them who were suffering under Gretchen Whitmer. In Iowa, their governor was not so bad, and so therefore they didn't have as much reason really to look up to DeSantis, or even, they wouldn't have necessarily heard of him. And so I do think that, if he actually tried to make a run at this and he started traveling around Iowa, his numbers would go up. But I don't think that he would beat Trump. I mean, hell, Ted Cruz won Iowa and still lost the primary. He won Iowa by a little bit, and then I think he lost New Hampshire by a lot, because old John Kasich came in second there, so it was like Trump, then Kasich, then Cruz, distant third, and, by South Carolina it was all over. Even Jeb recognized that. Jeb, after South Carolina, said, I'm done. And I respected Jeb for that, because he understood, you know what, I made a run at it, people didn't take to it, so that's it. I'm not going to stick around and, keep mucking up the campaign. There's nothing to be gained here. He was a realistic guy. And I think in a theoretical matchup between Trump and DeSantis, we probably would know by South Carolina how things were going to go anyway. And that's assuming you don't have other candidates, like a Liz Cheney or something like that. I think that Liz Cheney probably would want to play a John Anderson role, where she went as an independent maybe and tried to spoil the election for the Republican, although back in 1980, Carter was so unpopular, Reagan still won in a pretty big landslide, even with John Anderson, a anti-Reagan Republican, on the ballot in maybe not all 50 states, but a lot of states. Liz Cheney, of course, probably would poll more. If Biden was on the ballot, it would be very dangerous for the Democrats if Liz Cheney was on the ballot, because I think that they've pumped up her reputation so much amongst Democrats. They think that she's basically Democrat, and they would look at Sleepy Joe, drooling on himself in his wheelchair with the blanket on his lap, and they would say, you know what, it's time for a woman president. Liz Cheney's basically a Democrat. Let's get her in there, and that would be a disaster for Democrats. But that would be a topic for another video. That's just something that popped into my head. I don't see, at this stage, DeSantis being able to take on Trump. I think that DeSantis would see a rise in his polling. He would be high. He would poll higher than he is now. Trump would not be getting 71% in the polls if people knew who DeSantis was. But once Trump and DeSantis got in the same room, I don't think that DeSantis can beat Trump at his own game. I don't have that much confidence in him. Maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong, but I don't see it. I think that people. Well, this will fade by 2024, but I think there's still a lot of people who are diehard for Trump, who look at 2020 and they say, you know what, we can't let it end here. Yes, I understand that there are people who say, you know what, I voted for Trump twice, but time for some new blood. DeSantis is good. You know, let's try things out with him. But there's too many people, I think, who want Trump to get that second term, and who want to right the wrongs of 2020, and that'll give them closure. So this went on much longer than I would have expected. I didn't think that. I honestly, I wasn't even sure if this was a solid enough topic for me to fill a whole day. But here we are. I'm almost at 30 minutes. It's my longest recording in a long time. So with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.